Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Isabella, and I'm an educator at the Museum of Early Trades and Crafts. And the building we're looking at on the screen houses the museum in Madison, New Jersey. This building was originally constructed in 1899 for a different purpose. So take a few moments, look at the building, think about what you think it may have been used for before it became a museum. This building, it may look like old churches. We've got stained glass windows, high ceilings, the clock tower, but it was never used as a church. This building was the town's first public library, and it was called the James Library. And so we're going to start off with just talking about the history of the building as it was the library and the construction of it. The building was constructed in 1899 by this man here, Mr. D. Willis James. The framed portrait on the right hangs above one of the three fireplaces we have in the museum. He was a Gilded Age industrialist and philanthropist who had a summer home here in Madison. Now, he was not quite as well known as some of his contemporaries like Rockefeller and Morgan, but he was a wealthy family, and his family was the founder of the Phelps Dodge Corporation. And this library wasn't the first building Mr. James constructed. 1 year earlier, he funded the construction of the James Building right across the street, which today is our education annex and where I'm actually streaming to you from. This is a very different style of building from the library. This James Building is more of a Renaissance revival, but it was also Madison's first commercial space with shops on the street level and community space above it. It housed the first mayor's office and even had a large concert hall on the second floor. And the income from this building was partially used to fund the James Library building. And so here we can see a blueprint of the museum along with a photo from when it was still being built. Mr. James and his wife, Ellen Curtis, believed that learning was just as important as going to church. So he built this library as a cathedral to learning. So Mr. James and his wife, Ellen Curtis, believed that learning was just as important as going to church, so they wanted this building to be a cathedral to learning. That's why it's modeled after the old churches. Also around this time, there was a movement happening where learning was seen as respite to the outside world. And there's a quote from the Madison Eagle posted September 28th, 1900 about the building. It said, "The building's interior appeals to all the finer senses, soothes and interests the worried mortal until all sense of the outer world is departed." So the idea for this building was that when you were inside it, you could completely focus on your studies, what you were learning, the book you were reading, and shut out the outside world. And so the library construction began in 1899 and was completed and opened to the public in 1900. Here are some photos of the library when it first opened that year. And it's hard to see in these photos, but above the main entryway, visitors can see the words library and free to all carved above it. As a way to keep the library accessible, the outer doors would stay unlocked at all times, while the inner doors would be locked. So that way, at any time during the night, people could enter the library and still go downstairs to the periodical room. The periodical room had newspapers available in several different languages so that non-English speakers could still access the news. It's important to remember that during this time, there were a lot of immigrants moving to Morris County, and not all of them spoke English. So as a way to keep this library in the building free and accessible, they included materials in various languages. And here we can just appreciate some photos. We have two photos of two different groups of children visiting the library, huddled around a table, reading books. And you can note the lamp on the table because we're going to talk about electricity in this building in a moment.
So where were the people moving from that were in this area?
So at the time, there was a lot of German and Irish immigration. There was also some happening from Spain and Jamaica, but it was largely going to be Irish, German, Jamaican, and a couple other places in the Caribbean as well, and Spanish. All right, so now we can see the interior of the library. Now today, when we go to the library, we walk up to the bookshelf ourselves, we grab the book we want, bring it to the desk, and then take it home to read. But that's not how this library operated. So here, the books were not to be taken home. Instead, they had to be read in the reading room, which we can see in the leftmost and center image. Take note of the electric table lamps and the electric chandeliers. This building was one of the first commercial buildings in Madison to have electricity. You can also see some of the stenciling done on the walls. Stenciling was a popular and more affordable way to decorate walls back then. Artists would create the design, and then laborers could easily apply it. And we'll look at what they look like in color in a bit. Additionally, in the left image, we can see one of the three fireplaces. So each fireplace in the museum has a unique and different design. The stone fireplace here in the reading room features the quote, "God be thanked for books, they are the voices of the distant and the dead, and make up heirs of the spiritual life of past ages." And then, you really can't see it in this image, but we'll have a look where you can see it a little better soon. There are three carvings on the inside that show the story of Saint George and the dragon. For those who aren't familiar with the story, a dragon comes to town and starts eating all the farm animals. Eventually, there's no more animals in town. And so eventually they're afraid that the dragon's going to eat the children and the people in town until Saint George shows up and he defeats the dragon. So the three images show that story happening. And Mr. James, and you can really see it in the photos of the interior, he really wanted this building to be the best when it came to quality and workmanship. And then finally, all the way to the right is the librarian's desk. To access a book, you would have to request it at the desk. Then the librarian will go to the stacks or the bookshelves behind the desk to retrieve the book for you to again, you'll read in the reading room and not take that book home. And then we're going to shift to the founding of the museum. So the Madison Library grows very quickly. In just a few years, in 1908, the library asks to move its children's room across the street into the James Building, where, if anyone's familiar with Madison, is where the Chatham Booksellers is today. And we can see a picture of the children's room on the left. And even after they move the children's room, the library is going to keep growing. In 1965, the Madison Eagle is going to publish the little cartoon we see on the right that just talks about how full the library is. At the bottom of the cartoon, it reads, "Not even room for a bookworm." And we can see the building is depicted as struggling to contain all of the books it has. And so eventually, in 1967, the Madison Library is going to move out of the building to where it's currently located today. Well, luckily, around that same time, Edgar and Agnes Land were a local couple who had been accumulating a personal collection of hand tools and other everyday objects from the 18th and 19th centuries. And the Lands were eager to find a home for their collection, and so they approached the municipality with the idea for the Museum of Early Trades and Crafts, which was founded in 1969 and officially opened to the public in 1970. And ever since, the Museum of Early Trades and Crafts has been telling the stories of ordinary New Jersey people from the 18th and 19th century. And even today, the building is still owned by the borough, who has graciously enabled us to continue using the building for the museum. On the slide, we can see on the left a photo of the young couple in front of an earlier version of the museum logo in 1970, the year it opens. And then on the right, you can see them individually in front of some of those early museum displays. And here we can see some more early images of the museum. On the left, we see some of those early displays again, which is going to initially start as the land's personal collection. And then on the right, we can even see a school group visiting the museum looking at those displays. And if anyone here visits the museum, especially between Tuesday and Friday, it's very likely you will still run into a school group visiting the museum. And so this is what our space looks like today. On the left is the main gallery, which you may recognize as being the former reading room. This space holds our rotating exhibits, which changes once to twice a year. And now you can see a bit of that stenciling work in color as well. And we'll still take an even closer look at that. I just wanted to point it out while I still had this image up. And then on the right, we have our permanent exhibition called Working the Land, Life, Family, and Change in Early 1800s New Jersey, which we will dive into shortly. And it's hard to tell in this photo, but I just want us to note that the museum actually kept some of the bookshelves used by the library. We have since repurposed them, though, to display our permanent exhibit now. So what makes up all these rows and aisles are the shelves of the old bookshelves. So now that we've gone over that brief history of the building and the museum, let's talk a little bit more about the architectural style and some of the elements and features you'll see in the building. The architectural style is called Richardsonian Romanesque Revival, and the style pulls a lot of inspiration from older churches. You'll see looking at the building, there are aspects of medieval, Gothic, and Romanesque architecture present, such as with the arches and the vaulted ceilings. Other notable features include the clock tower, the stained glass windows, and the stone exterior. The image on the bottom right shows us the texture present on the outside of the building. It has a raw, rock-like look. But if you look, the stones are cut into various sizes of squares and rectangles. So it gives it a very clean, geometric look as well. And we can see a closer up image of that carving I mentioned earlier that says free to all above the entryway. Because again, the intention of this library was to be free and accessible to all. Additionally, you can even see several gargoyles sticking out above at the top of the building. Historically, gargoyles were used as a way to allow water to run off the roof, like a decorative gutter. That being said, the gargoyles on our building, though, are purely decorative. They're not going to act as a little water spout for us. And as I've promised, here's a close-up of the stenciling work you will see in the museum. As previously mentioned, the stencils are designed and made by an artist, and then a laborer easily applies them. Unfortunately, we no longer have the original stencils, but we were able to have a conservator recreate them for us. And that's how part of how we're able to maintain the detail on the wall all of these years later. And we have many stained glass windows in our building, which when we have young school groups, they always say that they think the museum used to be a church because of the colorful windows. However, we have a little twist with them. Mr. James liked the idea of the stained glass windows, but instead of having them focus on religious stories, he wanted them to focus on education and learning because, again, this was a library meant to really focus you in on the idea of studies and the importance of education. So our windows are going to have quotes and imagery related to education, reading, literature, science, philosophy, and the arts. And these are just 6 of the many stained glass windows in our building. And it's going to give you an idea of some of the various styles of windows present. All the way on the left, we have 2 rectangle windows with detailed images painted in a largely sepia tone. The quote on the top reads, "The foundation of every state is the education of the youth," and is attributed to Dionysius. The one below it features a grist mill. Grist mills were largely out of use by 1900, but they were very common in New Jersey, so visitors would have still recognized the structure. And the quote reads, "More water glideth by the mill than what's the miller of," which is a quote from one of the works by Shakespeare. And then in the center, we have an arched design and a circle design. These feature some more detailed patterns, some floral geometric patterns. We see that mixture of stained glass styles happening. And the one on the left reads, "Use well the moment, what the hour brings, for thy use and thy power, and what thou best canst understand, is just the thing lies nearest to thy hand," which is attributed to Goethe. The circle one on the right reads, "Music is a stimulant to mental exertion," which is attributed to Disraeli. And then finally, all the way on the right, we have 2 oval designs with crests in the center and a ribbon draping the quote under the image. The top one reads, "Education is our only political safety," from Horace Mann. And you can see in the book on the crest, it says Veritas, which is Latin for truth. And the one on the bottom reads, "Architecture is frozen music," by Schelling. And then you can see we have a lovely decorative pillar featured on the crest. Most of these windows are painted stained glass, which features a single sheet of glass with images and patterns painted directly onto it. That being said, there are some areas of leaded stained glass, which has that smaller pieces of colored glass cut into various shapes that are then arranged into an image and then soldered together. These windows were done by Arthur B. Cutter, and he was explicitly chosen over another well-known artist, Louis Comfort Tiffany, because of how Cutter used the 2 different types of stained glass. So Mr. James liked how he used the painted stained glass and the leaded, whereas Tiffany tended to just use the leaded stained glass in his designs. And so that's why I'm now showing you these 2 windows as well. These 2 designs, I believe, do a great job at highlighting just one way that Cutter was able to really mix the 2 types of stained glass styles together. Both designs feature painted glass that's meant to look like silver plaques with the quotes on them. The one on the left reads, "Tongues in trees, books in running brooks, sermons in stones, and good in everything," which is also from a work by Shakespeare. As a side note, Shakespeare is the only person who has 2 quotes featured in our building. Then the one on the right reads, "Books are lighthouses erected in the great sea of time," by E.P. Whipple. And so then the images we see above the silver painted plaques are made with leaded stained glass. So again, we have those smaller pieces of colored glass that are cut and arranged to make the image. We can see on the left, we see a very simple but very bold landscape as well to accompany that quote about nature. And then the one on the right, we see a wave splashing up against a lighthouse with a small little boat here. Again, these are fairly simple images, but they really highlight the motion that's happening. They're very bold in color to contrast against the silver plaques. And again, then we are really seeing the 2 different styles of stained glass being mixed together to make something whole. And as I mentioned earlier, our building has 3 functional fireplaces, and these are just 2 of them. We already spoke about the stone one in the main gallery that we see on the left. But in this building, we can better see that carving in the back showing the story of St. George and the Dragon. So that center panel that the light is kind of blurring a little bit shows St. George riding a horse, holding a sword against a dragon. And the image on the left of that one, you see two kids cowering from the dragon. And the fireplace on the right is in a room that we call the library in the museum, and it is surrounded by ornate wood carvings. On top of the wooden fireplace is the painting of Mr. James that we saw earlier. Also featured on this fireplace is a short quote that reads, "How forcible are right words." I would also like to note that all of the wood carved details in the museum were done by hand, and that does include this fireplace. Because just to also reiterate, Mr. James wanted this building to be the absolute best when it came to quality and workmanship, and it shows. And as part of the Richardsonian Romanesque Revival style, you'll see large arched doorways, vaulted ceilings, which we can see a little bit on the left. We can see the top of one of those arches, and we can see the vaulted high ceilings adorned with, again, that stenciling work. And then on the right, we can see a closer look at some of the electric chandeliers in the building, because once again, this was one of the first commercial buildings to be built with electricity in Madison. And now we have what we call the college seals. So this is the top of the doorway that leads you into the library in the museum, and you'll see 7 crests. So these crests are the first 7 colleges and universities in the United States. Going from left to right, we have Rutgers University, University of Pennsylvania, Yale, Harvard, William and Mary, Princeton, and Columbia. So now that we've gone through the windows and the building a little bit more, let's dive into our permanent exhibit, Working the Land, Life, Family, and Change in Early 1800s New Jersey. So this exhibit tells the stories of men and women who lived in New Jersey during the early 1800s. It explores the tools and strategies that helped the people of the time meet the challenges of working the land. It also discusses the moments of change, the new technologies, innovations, adaptations, and breakthrough inventions that changed people's lives during this time. And again, with this closer look, you can get a better look at the bookshelves, or repurposed bookshelves that we use. This exhibit was installed in the spring of 2019, so we can see the more modern graphics and interactive features. One such feature is the small game, which is like a simplified version of life. Players spin the wheel and see how luck may affect their farm and their ability to bring supplies to the market. Maybe something good will happen, like your milk cow has twins. Or something bad could happen, like a fox eating your chicks. So this fun game teaches players about some of the challenges of running a farm during the 1800s, and it's especially popular with children who visit the museum, who, to their dismay, if they're here for a field trip, I often have to tell them you can play the game after you finish your work, because students love to go right to this wheel. And as we continue through some of the highlights of the exhibit, we're going to use the seasons to further guide our look. And first we have fall. Fall is an important time of year because it was time to harvest the crops. Corn was a staple crop in New Jersey during this time. Corn was harvested once the plants were dried out and dying. Once harvested, the kernels need to be removed from the cob. And that task was generally done by hand until the invention of the corn sheller, which we can see on the left here. The user drops the ear of corn into that hole we see on top. Then by turning the crank on the right, Toothed wheels on the inside are going to rip the kernels off the cob and drop the kernels and cob out separately. This is going to cut down on the amount of time and the amount of effort that we need to put in to removing the kernels from the cob. And during those cold winters of New Jersey, people in early America depended on fire for warmth and light. Candles weren't just decorative and fragrance like they are today. They were an essential part of any household. That being said, wax was hard to come by for the average person. Soy wax hasn't been invented yet. Beeswax is very limited and very expensive, and other sources are going to be harder to find. But there's something that you will find on just about any farm that can be used to make candles, and that is animal lard or animal fat. They boil it down and then pour it into molds, and they're also going to call this tallow. They'll put pieces of string in it for the wicks, allow it to harden. Once it's cooled, they'll pull it out, finish stripping any excess material until it's completely cooled and hardened. So we can see some of those tools used for making candles or used as candles during the 1800s. On the right, on the top, we can see an example of a candle mold. You can see the little wicks, the strings sticking out. And a mold such as this is going to make tapered candles like the ones you see below it. You will have to cut the wicks apart though so you can separate the candles. And these tallow candles, they're going to burn fast and they're going to be quite pungent. You could imagine, maybe you made some bacon for breakfast. You pour that fat into the candle mold. You burn that candle. Your whole house is probably going to smell like bacon. This is also, as a side note, part of why a lot of sconces and candle holders need to be high up so that animals like cats and dogs can't access those candles. And so, but beeswax though, it's going to burn slower and have less of an odor. So if a family was able to access beeswax, they're going to use it sparingly. They might mix it into the tallow, but most candles being made at home by the average person are going to be all or nearly all made of tallow. And so until the invention of the removable beehive, beeswax is going to remain limited and expensive for everyday people. They're going to use it sparingly if they can get it. And next we have spring. Spring is a busy time of year. Fields need to be prepped for crops to be planted, and animal care was always very important for maintaining any farm. Animals like horses were key to helping farmers do work around the farm. As I'm sure we know, spring can be a wet time of year, and so farmers need to figure out how to keep their horses from sinking in the mud. They're big, heavy animals, and if the ground gets too wet, or maybe they're in a cranberry bog, that horse is gonna sink in and get stuck. So they invented these mud shoes that we can see on the left. Mud shoes would be strapped over the hoof, and it's hard to see, but there's a metal bar that goes across the bottom, and the hoof is going to go through that hole and rest on that bar. And then the leather straps you see on top are going to be strapped around the hoof to hold the shoe in place. This is going to act kind of like the idea of snowshoes, give them a little bounce, spread their weight out a little bit more so they don't sink as much into the mud. Another animal that is going to need special care are sheep. We use sheep's wool to make textiles, and textiles was very important during this time. And after the American Revolution, there's limited imports from Britain, so we need to be able to make our own textiles, and wool is going to be very important for this. And every spring, sheep's wool needs to be cut. Just like us getting a haircut, it's a safe process for the animal. In fact, it's medically necessary to prevent the animal from overheating in the summer. I'm sure, as we're all aware, wool sweaters are quite warm. And so when you have all of this wool just growing, it's going to be very hot. So we need to cut the hair off of the sheep. And so shears, such as the pair we can see on the right, are going to be used to accomplish this task. The just to give you an idea of the size of these shears, they all together measure to be 13 inches long. So they're a massive pair of scissors, essentially. And sometimes if the sheep is squirming or moving around a lot, you may need two people to fully shear the sheep, one person to help hold the sheep and the other person to do the cutting. And as farmers shear the sheep, they want to try and get all that wool off in one big piece, being careful not to pull at it too much. Because the more you work the wool and pull at it, it's going to cause the wool to knot and lock together, making it harder to remove and uncomfortable for the animal. And I will say, not a lot has changed when it comes to the care that goes into maintaining our horses and sheep. The one of the biggest changes, though, is when it comes to shearing sheep, now we have lovely electric razors, similar or electric shears that are like our electric razors to make the job a little easier and a little bit faster. But otherwise, generally the same. And so I mentioned beeswax and why it was so expensive. And bees are fascinating creatures, so they are considered livestock. And beekeeping was both popular and necessary in New Jersey. And this was partially because the farmers need bees to help pollinate their crops. So nearly every farmer in New Jersey will have beehives on them. Bees were so important to farms in New Jersey that they even printed bees on the state's currency. Straw beehives, like the one we can see in the image on the left, is called a skep. Skeps, or even logs, are going to be the structures we use to house our beehives. Could also see an example of a skep in that middle image as well. And they're going to be kept off the ground so they don't get too moist. And then you're going to use a scraper to pull out all of that honeycomb, all of that wax, all of the honey that's inside, and just scrape it all out, which you do end up destroying the beehive in the process. And so luckily, though, pretty early on into the 1800s, you're able to order queen bees via the mail. So you can easily get a new hive started, but you do have to destroy it to harvest the honeycomb. That is until the invention of the removable frame beehive that we see in the bottom right-hand corner of the slide. This was invented in 1852 and largely has not changed since then. This allows the bees to build their honeycomb on nice straight lines in nice rows so that the beekeeper can come in, grab one of the frames, scrape it off, and then reinsert it without destroying the entire hive. This was a huge invention and is still used today by modern beekeepers. And so with that, now that we've gone through our 4 seasons, time to talk about our lower exhibit and viewable storage facility. So in the downstairs, we discussed the trades and craftsmen that existed in the late 1700s and early 1800s. It is set up like a main street with businesses. We even highlight businesses, the people, and the signs we know were in Madison during this time. On the slide, we see 2 pieces that I like to point out to people because I think they're fascinating objects. On the left, we have a printing press and type case. This is a Washington printing press that is on loan to us from the Madison Library. And this massive printing press would have taken 2 people to operate it. The printing press works by placing individual letters and carved illustrations and characters, each individually into the press. They're then covered in ink and paper pressed on top. And there are 2 common phrases we use today that actually come from this type of printing press. The first is mind your P's and Q's, which comes from when you prep the letters to go into the printing press, they need to be arranged backwards, like a mirror image. By doing so, they'll be printed correctly onto the paper. Because of this, our lowercase p's and q's look quite similar, so it's very easy to mix them up. The phrase originated as a way to say, pay attention to what you are doing. Now, since then, it has evolved, and today tends to be more of a way to say, watch your manners. I do not know what exactly caused that transition or when it happened, though. And then, discussing lowercase letters brings me to the next thing. Well, I guess I should say words instead of phrases that come from the printing press. So we use the word uppercase to describe the larger capital letters, and then we use lowercase to describe the smaller ones. And that comes from that typecase we see on the left. The larger letters, those capital letters, they're going to be kept in the bigger drawers that are up top, known as the upper cases. So those letters become the uppercase. Then those smaller letters are going to be kept in the smaller drawers at the bottom, also known as the lower cases, which then will then turn into the lower case. So then on the right, we see a glass orb filled with water. It's a simple object, easy to miss, but it's fascinating. It's called an illuminating orb. This orb was used to concentrate light onto certain areas, making it easier to see, lighting it up. Shoemakers likely used it to help see the finer and smaller details on the shoes they were making. And this probably could have been used by other tradesmen as well, but we have this incorporated as part of our shoemaker exhibit. So you can imagine we are trying to stitch together little pieces of leather, see where those holes are, make sure you're following the right lines. You're going to want some extra light to do so, and this orb is going to help you do that. And then we have our viewable storage facility. This is a new structure recently added, and it's a working space. So visitors can't go inside of it, but this window that we see on the right allows visitors to peer into where the collection department keeps and maintains the objects that are not on display. It gives them a sort of behind the scenes look at the work that happens in a museum. And this is a big deal for small museums. Not a lot of smaller museums can afford to have something like this. The room is climate controlled, which is very important for artifacts because artifacts can degrade faster when there's big swings in things such as humidity and temperature. So this room is meant to be environmentally stable and controlled. And so with that, I have one last little fun story to end on for today. So on the door frame of the library, when you visit, there's some graffiti on there that reads, Jock, Pick 45, November 21st, 1944. This was discovered around 2006 by a museum employee who then, by looking through the old Madison High School yearbooks, determined that this must be August Ralph Piccolo because she thought, well, Pick seems like a nickname. So in 2007, the museum succeeded in tracking down Mr. Piccolo, who at the age of 80 visited the museum and confirmed that he wrote Pick 45 on the museum wall, or at the time, library wall. He graduated from Madison High School in 1945 and lived in Berkeley Heights. So he visited the museum with his daughter and had his photo taken here. This is our graffiti artist here, Mr. Piccolo, with the museum educator at the time, Meg, who's shining a flashlight on his graffiti. That being said, he didn't write the word jock that I mentioned. He only wrote Pick 45 in the date. And so we have since now covered it so that the graffiti is preserved and you can see it if you visit the museum. Thank you all for watching today, and I hope to see you soon at the museum.